My rich wife, the CEO, slapped me in front of my friends and kids, claiming she's the new man in charge. 5 minutes later, my lawyer arrived as I taught her a painful lesson she'll never forget. You know what they say about hindsight being 20/20? Well, mine's got prescription lenses and a magnifying glass attachment. Because looking back, I should have seen this train wreck coming from 3 zip codes away. But here's the thing about being married to a CEO. You get real good at pretending everything's fine while your world slowly turns into a corporate hellscape disguised as a backyard barbecue. So there I was playing the beautiful house husband on what was supposed to be a chill Saturday afternoon. Just me, some friends, our 2 kids, and enough ribs to feed a small army. Nothing fancy. Paper plates, plastic cups, and that fancy-ass potato salad from Whole Foods that I pretend I made from scratch. The kind of gathering where everyone's supposed to relax, kick back, and remember what it feels like to be human instead of walking LinkedIn profiles. Micah, my 10-year-old, was doing that thing kids do where they chase bubbles like they're hunting unicorns. All serious concentration and flailing arms. The kid's got my stubborn streak, but, thankfully his mom's coordination, so he was actually catching some. Rowan, 7 and twice as dramatic as a Broadway musical, was providing color commentary for every bubble that got away. Dad, that one was huge. It was like the size of my head. Did you see it? Did you see it? Yeah, buddy. I saw it. Hard to miss a soap bubble when you're standing 3 feet away. Quinn and Leo were doing their best impression of adults, nursing beers, and talking about fantasy football like it actually mattered. Quinn's one of those guys who thinks knowing every stat from 1987 makes him a sports genius, while Leo just nods along because he's too polite to tell Quinn that nobody cares about his draft picks. They're good guys, though. The kind of friends who show up when you need them and don't ask too many questions when your life starts looking like a reality TV show. I was in my element, honestly. Spatula in hand, apron that said Grill Sergeant. A Father's Day gift from Micah that I wore unironically. Just a regular dad doing regular dad things. The ribs were hitting that perfect sweet spot between charred and tender. The kind that makes you forget you ever considered being vegetarian. I was mentally calculating whether I'd made enough when I heard the click-clack of designer heels on our brick pathway. Enter Sloane Mercer. And yeah, she kept her maiden name because God forbid anyone confuse her with some nobody's wife. She strutted into our backyard like she was walking into a board meeting, wearing this crisp white pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Phone glued to her ear naturally because heaven knows the fate of the business world hung in the balance of whatever call she was taking. Behind her, like some kind of corporate entourage, came 2 of her VP buddies, Jessica and Mark. I think hard to tell them apart since they both have that same dead behind the eyes look that comes from selling your soul to quarterly earnings reports. The kids lit up when they saw her. Mommy, look at the bubbles. Rowan practically launched himself at her legs, which would have been adorable if she hadn't held up one perfectly manicured finger in the universal not now gesture while continuing her phone conversation. Micah, being older and wiser to the ways of corporate mom, just waved and went back to his bubble hunting. Smart kid. Quinn and Leo did that awkward thing guys do when the wife shows up late to her own family gathering, suddenly finding their beer labels incredibly fascinating while trying to pretend they weren't just talking about how she's never around. The VP brigade immediately flanked her like Secret Service agents, creating this little corporate bubble in the middle of what was supposed to be a family cookout. I watched her for about 5 minutes, still talking on that damn phone, gesturing with her free hand like she was conducting an orchestra of spreadsheets. The ribs were getting overcooked. The kids were starting to get that deflated look they get when mom chooses work over them for the 1000th time. And I could feel that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The one that said I was about to become the bad guy for asking my own wife to act like she wanted to be here. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I walked over, smiled politely at the VP twins, and said, "Hey, babe. Think you could put the phone away for like 5 minutes? The kids would love to show you their bubble technique." Simple request, right? The kind of thing that shouldn't require a board resolution or a cost-benefit analysis. She looked at me like I just asked her to donate a kidney. That little smirk spread across her face. The one I'd grown to hate. The one that said I was being unreasonable for expecting basic human decency from my own wife. She held up that finger again, mouthed 1 second, which in Sloane speak means anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 hours, and turned her back to me. But here's where things got interesting. I didn't walk away. I stood there, spatula in hand, wearing my ridiculous apron, and waited. Quinn noticed. Leo noticed. Even the corporate zombies noticed. The kids definitely noticed. And after another full minute of listening to her discuss synergistic market penetration strategies or whatever NBA word salad was on today's menu, I did something that apparently crossed some invisible line in the sand. I gently, and I mean gently, placed my hand on her shoulder and said, "Sloan, 5 minutes, please." That's when she ended her call, handed the phone to Jessica or Mark, and turned to face me with a smile that could have frozen hell over. She stepped close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with that particular scent of barely contained rage that I'd become intimately familiar with over the past year. "You want my attention," she said, voice sweet as artificial sweetener. "You've got it." And then she slapped me. Not a playful tap, not a "oh, you silly man" kind of thing. A full-on open-handed slap that echoed across our backyard like a gunshot. The kind that makes your ears ring and your vision blur for a second. The kind that says, "I own you." In a language older than words. The silence that followed was deafening. Quinn's beer froze halfway to his lips. Leo looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. The VP brigade suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was watching my kids' faces. Micah's bubble wand dropped to the ground, forgotten. Rowan's mouth fell open like he'd just watched his entire understanding of how the world works crumble into dust. And Sloan, she stood there in her pristine white suit, looking around at our shocked audience like she'd just given a particularly effective PowerPoint presentation. Then she delivered the kicker, the line that I'll probably be hearing in therapy for the next decade. "I'm the new man in charge here." Her voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear, cold enough to frost windows, and delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that would make a mob boss take notes. She said it like she was announcing a corporate restructuring, like she'd just demoted me from husband to unpaid intern in my own life. I felt the heat rising in my chest, that familiar cocktail of humiliation, rage, and the kind of helpless frustration that comes from being publicly emasculated by someone who's supposed to love you. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to do something, say something, anything to reclaim whatever dignity was left scattered across our brick patio like broken glass. But instead, I swallowed that fire. I took a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, standing there in her power suit with her power pose, surrounded by her power friends, having just demonstrated her power over me in front of our children and our friends. And I said the only thing that felt true in that moment, noted. That's it. One word, not "how dare you" or "what the hell is wrong with you" or any of the 100 other responses that were ricocheting around my skull like pinballs. Just noted like I was a secretary taking minutes at the board meeting of my own destruction. I turned around calmly, deliberately, and walked toward our sliding glass door. Behind me, I could hear Sloan starting to laugh, probably thinking she'd just won whatever twisted game we'd been playing for the past year. The VP brigade was already pulling out their phones, no doubt documenting this little power display for the group chat later. Our friends stood there like deer in headlights, probably wondering if they should call someone or just pretend they'd never witnessed whatever fresh hell had just unfolded in suburbia. But here's what none of them knew. What Sloan especially didn't know. As I walked through that sliding door, as I stepped into the cool air conditioning of our kitchen, as I moved away from the wreckage of what was supposed to be a nice family gathering, I pulled out my phone not to call my mom or cry to my therapist or post some passive-aggressive Facebook status about disrespect. I opened my text messages. I found the conversation thread I'd labeled simply AC for Ariel, and I typed one word, just one word that I'd been waiting months to send. The word that would set in motion everything I'd been quietly carefully planning while my wife transformed our marriage into her personal episode of Succession. Now I hit send. The response came back immediately like she'd been sitting there waiting for it. 5 minutes. Stay calm. Don't engage. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. The slap wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. All those nights I'd spent wondering if I was crazy, if I was being too sensitive, if maybe I was just not built for being married to a high-powered CEO. All those times I'd made excuses for her behavior, rationalized her cruelty, convinced myself that love meant taking whatever she dished out with a smile and a "yes, dear." All of that ended with one perfectly timed slap in front of our children. Because here's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your title, your bank account, or how many people call you boss. They don't care if you're used to getting your way, or if you think the rules don't apply to you. Consequences are the great equalizer, the universal truth that even CEOs can't restructure or leverage by their way out of. As I stood in our kitchen listening to the muffled sounds of our guests trying to pretend they hadn't just watched my marriage implode in real time, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, not sadness, not even relief. I felt ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to stop being the supporting character in my own life. Ready to show my kids that sometimes the scariest thing you can do is stand up to someone you love when they've forgotten how to love you back. The timer on my phone buzzed. 5 minutes exactly. Time for the real party to start. You ever notice how the universe has this twisted sense of timing? Like how your phone always dies right when you need GPS the most, or how you always run into your ex when you're looking like you just crawled out of a dumpster. Well, apparently the cosmos also has a thing for dramatic irony, because exactly 5 minutes after I sent that text, and I mean exactly like some cosmic stopwatch was keeping score, our doorbell rang. I was still standing in the kitchen staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the smartest move I'd ever pulled. The sounds from the backyard had shifted from uncomfortable silence to that forced kind of chatter people do when they're desperately trying to pretend they didn't just witness someone's dignity get curb stomped in real time. Sloane was already back to queen bee mode. Probably spinning the whole thing like it was just a little marital miscommunication. Nothing to see here, folks. But then that doorbell rang, and I swear to God it sounded like the opening notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You know that that means fate is knocking, and you better answer because it's not going away. I opened the front door and there she was, Ariella Cho, looking like she'd stepped out of a legal thriller where the smart lawyer always wins. 5'0" of pure concentrated competence, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car but somehow made her look approachable instead of intimidating. She had this way of carrying herself that said, "I could destroy you in court, but I'd rather we kept things civilized." Behind her stood 2 other people who were very clearly not here for the barbecue. "Jordan," she said, nodding like we just bumped into each other at Starbucks instead of executing what was probably the most elaborate revenge plot since the Count of Monte Cristo. "Ready?" And that's when it hit me. This woman had been planning for this exact moment for months. While I'd been agonizing over whether I was overreacting, whether I should just suck it up and deal with Sloane's increasingly toxic behavior, Ariella had been building a legal fortress. She told me to document everything, save everything, keep records of everything. I thought she was being paranoid. Turns out she was being a goddamn prophet. "This is Marcus," she said, gesturing to a thin guy in a rumpled suit who looked like he'd rather be doing literally anything else. "He's our process server. And these are Janet and Carlos, licensed security contractors." The 2 security people looked like they moonlighted as yoga instructors, calm, centered, and probably capable of subduing a grizzly bear, using only positive affirmation and strategic pressure points. Marcus was clutching a manila envelope like it contained the secrets of the universe, which in a way it kind of did. Janet and Carlos just stood there being professionally invisible the way good security does, present enough to matter, subtle enough that you don't feel like you're under siege. Ariella walked past me into the kitchen like she owned the place, which, considering what was about to happen, she sort of did. She set down this perfectly organized stack of folders on our kitchen island, the same island where Sloane usually dumped her work papers and takeout containers like she was marking territory. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Emergency protection order," she said, tapping the first folder like she was reading a grocery list. "Board adopted conduct clause enforcement." Tap on the second folder in a notarized letter from a majority block of Mercer Dynamics investors. Tap on the third. Her voice was soft, conversational, like she was explaining how to make pancakes instead of describing the complete nuclear annihilation of my wife's current existence. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Sloane holding court on our deck, gesturing with her hands while the VP brigade nodded along like bobbleheads. She was probably explaining how she'd just established boundaries or demonstrated leadership or whatever corporate speak she used to justify treating people like garbage. The woman could spin straw into gold if it helped her quarterly numbers. "You sure about this?" I asked Ariella. Because even though I'd been the one to set this whole thing in motion, watching it actually happen felt surreal. Like ordering a pizza and then being surprised when someone shows up with food. She looked at me with those sharp, dark eyes that had probably terrified opposing counsel in courtrooms from here to San Francisco. "Jordan, she assaulted you in front of your children and multiple witnesses. She did it loudly, deliberately, and with obvious intent to humiliate. The question isn't whether I'm sure. The question is why you waited this long." Fair point. Brutally fair point. "Besides," she added, pulling out her own phone and checking something. "The board meeting concluded about 3 minutes ago. The votes have been cast, the decisions have been made, and the corporate machinery is already in motion. At this point, we're not creating consequences. We're just delivering them." That's when I realized the true genius of Ariella Cho. While I've been thinking this was about getting revenge on Sloane, she'd been thinking about it like a chess master planning 12 moves ahead. This wasn't emotional. It was surgical, clean, precise, and probably completely legal in 17 different ways. She nodded to Marcus, who suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the continental United States. "Showtime," she said, and I swear she almost smiled. Almost. I watched through the glass door as our little parade made its way to the backyard. Ariella led the way, looking like she was heading to a casual business meeting. Marcus followed, clutching his envelope like it might explode. Janet and Carlos brought up the rear, maintaining that perfect balance of "we're professionals and please don't make this weird." The reaction from the peanut gallery was immediate and beautiful. Quinn's beer stopped halfway to his mouth again. The man was developing a real talent for freeze-frame drinking. Leo actually took a step backward, which was probably smart since he had good instincts about when was about to hit the fan. The VP twins looked like they'd just realized they were extras in someone else's drama instead of the main characters in their own corporate success story. But Sloane kept right on talking, waving her hand dismissively at what she probably assumed was some kind of delivery or maybe a noise complaint from the neighbors, because in Sloane's world, interruptions were for little people, and little people could wait until she was damn good and ready to acknowledge their existence. Marcus cleared his throat twice before Sloane finally turned around. And when she did, when she saw this official-looking guy with his official-looking envelope standing next to my lawyer and two people who were very obviously not here for the potato salad, her expression shifted from mild annoyance to something approaching concern. "Sloane Mercer," Marcus said, and his voice cracked just a little. Poor guy probably wasn't used to serving papers to people who could buy and sell him before lunch. Yes, Sloane's voice had that edge it got when she sensed a threat to her control. The same tone she probably used with subordinates who dared to question her decisions. "You've been served," Marcus said, and thrust that envelope at her like it was radioactive. "Emergency protection order and corporate conduct violation notice." The look on Sloane's face was priceless. Absolutely priceless. It was like watching someone realize they've been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish trying to breathe air. The perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all the color had drained from her face. Jessica or Mark tried to step forward, probably thinking they could somehow executive assistant their way out of the situation. But Janet and Carlos moved with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they'd done this dance before. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. Professionally, unavoidably present. "What is this?" Sloane demanded, her voice getting that shrill quality it took on when reality refused to bend to her will. She was looking at the papers like they were written in ancient Sanskrit, which, considering they were legal documents, they might as well have been. Ariella stepped forward and I watched from the kitchen window as she delivered what was probably the most polite verbal assassination I'd ever witnessed. Her voice stayed level, professional, almost kind, the way you'd explain to a child why they couldn't have ice cream for dinner. I couldn't hear every word from inside. But I caught enough to know that Ariella was laying out the facts like she was reading a weather report. The assault, the witnesses, the children present, the corporate conduct clause that Sloane herself had signed off on as part of her CEO contract, the board meeting that had just concluded, the immediate suspension of operational authority pending review. Sloane's phone started buzzing, then Jessica's phone started buzzing, then Mark's, then all three of them were staring at their screens with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters or stock market crashes. And that's when I realized that Ariella hadn't just planned this moment. She'd choreographed it. The timing, the witnesses, the corporate board meeting happening while Sloane was busy playing power games at a family barbecue. It was like watching a master class in strategic thinking, except instead of business school case studies, the subject was my marriage. From my spot in the kitchen, watching through the glass like I was observing some nature documentary about the mating habits of corporate executives, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not satisfaction exactly, not revenge. Something cleaner than that. Something that felt suspiciously like justice. Because here's the thing about people like Sloane. They're so used to being the biggest fish in the pond that they forget sharks exist. They get comfortable with their power, careless with their cruelty, confident that their victims will just keep taking it because that's what victims do. But sometimes, just sometimes, the victim has been planning their own comeback. Sometimes they've been documenting every slight, every humiliation, every moment of casual cruelty. Sometimes they've been building their own army, finding their own allies, preparing for the day when enough becomes enough. And sometimes that day arrives exactly 5 minutes after you slap your husband in front of your children. My phone buzzed. Text from Ariella. Phase 1 complete. Stay inside. Let us handle the rest. I looked out at the chaos unfolding on my deck. Sloane arguing with the process server. The VPs frantically making phone calls. Quinn and Leo looking like they'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. And I felt something that might have been peace. The revolution had begun. And it was 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Here's something they don't teach you in marriage counseling. The most devastating weapon isn't screaming, crying, or throwing dishes. It's paperwork. Cold, calculated, legally binding paperwork that turns your entire life upside down while maintaining the polite fiction that everyone's just following proper procedures. From my kitchen window, I had front row seats to what I was already thinking of as the Sloane Show cancellation edition. And let me tell you, watching a master manipulator realize she's been out-manipulated is better than any Netflix series you've ever binged. The woman who'd spent the last year treating our family like her personal corporate subsidiary was about to get a crash course in hostile takeovers. Ariella had positioned herself center stage on our deck, like she was delivering the keynote address at the conference of well-deserved comeuppances. She held one of those folders, the thick official-looking kind that meant business, and started reading from it like she was announcing the weather forecast, except instead of partly cloudy with a chance of rain. It was mostly screwed with a high probability of consequences. Ms. Mercer, Ariella began, her voice carrying that perfect blend of professional courtesy and barely contained satisfaction that only really good lawyers can pull off. Due to the documented assault that occurred 17 minutes ago in front of multiple witnesses, including 2 minor children, Judge Patricia Navarro has granted an emergency protection order effective immediately. Sloane's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and finally settling on that particular brand of rage that comes when someone who's used to controlling everything realizes they're not holding the steering wheel anymore. "This is ridiculous," Sloane snapped, waving her hands like she could somehow swat away legal documents. "This is a private family matter. You can't just we can," Ariella interrupted. And I loved how she didn't even look up from her papers. Assault in front of children ceases to be a private matter the moment it occurs. The temporary no harassment order establishes immediate boundaries for all interactions between you and your husband. Additionally, it sets an emergency co-parenting schedule pending a full hearing, which has been set for next Friday at 9 a.m. I watched Sloane's brain trying to process this information, and it was like watching a computer blue screen in real time. She kept opening and closing her mouth, probably cycling through her usual arsenal of intimidation tactics and finding them suddenly spectacularly useless. "Co-parenting schedule," she finally managed to sputter. "That's correct," Ariella said, flipping to another page. "Supervised visits only for the first week, then structured overnight visits pending completion of court-mandated anger management and parenting classes. All transitions to occur through a neutral third party." The VP Brigade, who I was now thinking of as Tweedle incompetent and Tweedle useless, started edging toward the gate like they could somehow escape this corporate nightmare by pretending they were never here. But Ariella wasn't done with her presentation. And honestly, I was starting to think she'd missed her calling as a Broadway performer. "Now," she continued, opening the second folder with the flair of a magician revealing the final trick regarding your professional obligations. "As you're aware, Ms. Mercer, your CEO contract with Mercer Dynamics includes a comprehensive code of conduct clause, specifically Section 4.7, which addresses public behavior that could negatively impact brand reputation." And that's when I saw it. The exact moment Sloane realized she wasn't just dealing with a marital dispute anymore. This was bigger than our marriage, bigger than our family drama, bigger than whatever power trip she'd been on for the past year. This was about to hit her where it really hurt her precious company. The board conducted an emergency session via video conference approximately 12 minutes ago. Ariella continued, consulting her notes like she was reading a grocery list instead of delivering a professional death sentence. Present were 7 of 9 board members, constituting a legal quorum. The vote was unanimous. Unanimous. I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. Sloane had spent so much time alienating people, treating them like disposable resources instead of human beings, that when push came to shove, nobody was willing to stand up for her. Not even her own board of directors. Due to the documented assault, witnessed public misconduct, and potential brand liability, your operational authority as CEO is suspended for 14 days pending a full review by the Ethics Committee and Corporate Counsel. Ariella announced. Chief Financial Officer Riley Park will serve as interim signatory for all corporate decisions effective immediately. Sloane's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it started buzzing continuously like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. Jessica and Mark's phones joined the symphony of corporate chaos, and I watched all 3 of them stare at their screens with the kind of horror usually reserved for alien invasion movies. "Access revoked," Sloane read from her phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Security alert account frozen, pending review." She looked up at Ariella with an expression that could have powered a small city with pure fury. "You can't do this." "We didn't do anything," Ariella replied. And I swear there was just the tiniest hint of satisfaction in her voice. "The board did this. Your behavior did this. The corporate policies you signed off on did this. We're simply executing pre-existing protocols that were put in place to protect the company from exactly this kind of situation. And that's when the full scope of Ariella's planning became clear. This wasn't just about protecting me or the kids, though that was obviously part of it. This was about using Sloane's own corporate machinery against her. The same policies she'd used to control other people, the same rules she'd bent to her advantage, the same power structures she'd climbed to get where she was, all of it was now being used to clip her wings. The company credit cards have been temporarily suspended, Ariella continued, consulting another paper. Corporate vehicle access has been revoked. The executive travel account has been frozen. And yes, before you ask, that includes the company jet, the VIP concierge service, and the executive assistant pool. Sloane looked like someone had just told her that gravity had been cancelled, and she was expected to figure out flying on her own. Her mouth was opening and closing like she was trying to speak, but no sound was coming out. It was the first time in probably 5 years that I'd seen my wife genuinely speechless. This is temporary, Ariella emphasized. And I appreciated that she was at least pretending to be reasonable. The suspension can be lifted after the ethics review, assuming completion of required courses in compliance with behavioral standards going forward. Required courses. Sloane's voice cracked on the words anger management, executive leadership ethics, and family dynamics counseling. Ariella listed off standard corporate rehabilitation protocol for conduct violations. Nothing personal, just policy. The beauty of it was that it really was just policy. Sloane had signed off on these exact procedures herself, probably never imagining they'd be applied to her. She'd helped create the very system that was now systematically dismantling her life. Brick by perfectly legal brick. Riley Park, Sloane's own CFO and supposedly loyal lieutenant, chose that exact moment to call. Sloane's phone rang with that special ringtone she'd assigned to important business calls, and she answered it like a drowning person grabbing a life preserver. Riley, her voice was desperate, hopeful. Riley, thank God. Tell me you can fix this. I couldn't hear Riley's side of the conversation, but I could read Sloane's face like a roadmap to despair. With every word Riley spoke, Sloane seemed to shrink a little more. Her shoulders sagged. Her confident posture crumbled. The woman who'd slapped me 15 minutes ago was transforming into someone I almost felt sorry for. Almost. What do you mean the insurers are involved? Sloane was practically whispering now. What do you mean Argent Bio wants a meeting? Riley, I've been their primary contact for 3 years. And there it was. The moment Sloane realized this wasn't just about her marriage or even just about her job. This was about her entire professional reputation, her network, her carefully constructed identity as the unstoppable CEO who could handle anything. All of it was crashing down because she couldn't handle a simple request to put her phone away at a family gathering. The irony was beautiful in its completeness. The woman who'd built her career on consequence management and accountability structures was experiencing both firsthand, courtesy of the very system she'd helped design. Janet and Carlos, meanwhile, had positioned themselves near the gate with the kind of casual precision that suggested they'd done this before. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present enough to remind everyone that this wasn't a negotiation. This was a delivery of predetermined consequences. And everyone could either accept that gracefully or learn what security contractors actually meant. Sloane finally hung up the phone and looked around our backyard like she was seeing it for the first time. The VP brigade was already retreating toward the gate, mumbling something about urgent calls and prior commitments. Our friends Quinn and Leo were performing their own strategic withdrawal, probably planning to discuss this bombshell over beers for the next 6 months. This is insane, Sloane said. But her voice had lost that commanding edge. She sounded tired, confused, maybe even a little scared. This is my house. These are my children. You can't just actually, Ariella said, closing her folders with the satisfaction of someone who just completed a perfect presentation. We can, and we have. The lesson, Ms. Mercer, is already in progress. And with that, she nodded to me through the glass door, signaled to her team, and began what I was already thinking of as the most educational 15 minutes of Sloane's entire adult life. The painful lesson had officially begun. You want to know what's really messed up about toxic relationships? It's not the big blow-up moments. Those are actually easier to deal with because at least they're obvious. It's all the little cuts, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, the slow erosion of your dignity that happens so gradually you don't even notice you're bleeding until someone points out you're standing in a puddle of your own self-respect. Ariella opened that fourth folder, the one I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. And I knew Sloane was about to discover just how much attention I'd been paying to those little cuts. See, while she'd been busy building her corporate empire and treating our family like a poorly managed subsidiary, I'd been doing something she never expected from the simple house husband. I'd been taking notes. Now we come to the documentation phase, Ariella announced, pulling out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Mr. Jordan has been quite thorough in his recording over the past 18 months. The look on Sloane's face was priceless. She glanced from Ariella to me, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out when her harmless, non-confrontational husband had transformed into someone capable of strategic planning. The answer, of course, was right around the time she'd started treating me like an incompetent employee instead of her partner. These aren't allegations of infidelity, Ariella clarified, which was probably smart since half the neighborhood was now peeking over fences trying to figure out why our barbecue had turned into an episode of Judge Judy. Though there have been rumors circulating in certain professional circles, Sloane flinched. Apparently, those rumors had made it back to her, which meant they were probably more than rumors. But Ariella was right. This wasn't about who Sloane might or might not be screwing in conference rooms after hours. This was about something much more damning in the eyes of the law. Financial neglect and emotional abuse with a paper trail longer than a CVS receipt. What we have here, Ariella continued. Flipping through pages with the casual efficiency of someone who'd organized every piece of evidence like she was curating a museum exhibit, is a comprehensive pattern of family financial neglect and emotional misconduct documented over 8 months. 8 months. That's how long I'd been playing detective in my own life, keeping track of every broken promise, every missed dinner, every time Sloane chose work over our kids, and then made it sound like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic human decency from my own wife. The first batch of evidence was the easy stuff, the quantifiable neglect that even a corporate board could understand. 47 family commitments missed without notice, Ariella read off. 63 instances of arriving more than 2 hours late to pre-planned family activities. 89 occasions where family time was interrupted by non-emergency business calls lasting more than 15 minutes. I'd kept a spreadsheet. Yeah, I know how that sounds, like I'm some obsessive weirdo who turned marriage into a data analytics project. But when your wife gaslight you daily about how you're being too sensitive or unrealistic in your expectations, sometimes you need cold, hard numbers to prove you're not losing your mind. Jesus, Jordan, Quinn muttered from somewhere near the gate. You kept track of all that, wouldn't you? I called back. If someone was constantly telling you that you were imagining things, wouldn't you want proof that you weren't crazy? But the real kicker was the HR documentation. See, Sloane had made one crucial mistake in her campaign of domestic terrorism. She'd brought it to work. Ariella pulled out a separate stack of papers that made Sloane's face go from pale to green. We also have formal complaints filed with Mercer Dynamics Human Resources regarding Ms. Mercer's conduct at company-sponsored events where family members were present, Ariella announced, including 3 separate incidents where she publicly berated her husband in front of employees and clients. Oh, yeah. Those. The company Christmas party where she dressed me down for interrupting important conversations when I'd asked if she wanted to dance with our kids. The client dinner where she'd made fun of my job in front of the Argent Bio executives, calling me her little house husband, like I was some kind of adorable pet project. The charity gala where she'd actually told me to know my place when I'd suggested we should head home because Rowan had school the next day. At the time, I'd swallowed the humiliation and told myself it was just Sloane being Sloane, stressed, overworked, taking it out on the nearest target. But her employees had been watching, her clients had been watching, and apparently some of them had been documenting. Additionally, Ariella continued, we have witnessed statements from neighbors regarding domestic disturbances. Mrs. Liu from next door had apparently been keeping her own little record of Sloane's greatest hits. The time she'd screamed at me in the driveway about forgetting to move her car loud enough that Mrs. Liu's dinner guests had asked if they should call someone. The Saturday morning when she'd called me pathetically useless because I'd bought the wrong kind of coffee pods. Her voice carrying across 3 backyards like a air raid siren. Mr. Okafor from across the street had contributed his own testimony about the evening Sloane had literally thrown my car keys at my head because I'd been 5 minutes late picking her up from the office. He'd been walking his dog and seen the whole thing, including the part where she'd made me get out and pick up the keys while she sat in the passenger seat checking her phone. But the real evidence, Ariella said, pulling out what looked like a tablet, comes from your own security system. And that's when Sloane's face went from green to that special shade of white usually reserved for people who've just seen their own ghost. Our doorbell camera, the one she'd insisted we install for security purposes and then promptly forgotten about because, let's face it, Sloane never thought the rules applied to her. Ariella queued up video after video, months of what she politely called smaller humiliations, but which I'd been living as daily reminders that my own wife thought I was beneath her. Sloane rolling her eyes when I tried to talk to her about the kids. Sloane cursing under her breath when she thought no one was listening. Sloane whispering threats about what would happen if I embarrassed her professionally by asking for basic respect at home. Now, to be clear, Ariella said, pausing the videos. None of this rises to the level of physical abuse, but it does establish a pattern of emotional misconduct and deliberate undermining of parental authority in front of the children. Emotional misconduct. I like that phrase. It made all those moments when Sloan had made me feel like garbage sound official, legitimate, worth addressing. For months, I'd been gaslit into thinking I was being too sensitive when I asked to be treated like an equal partner instead of an inconvenient employee in my own life. The children have reported to their school counselor unprompted that mommy is always angry at daddy and that daddy looks sad when mommy comes home. Ariella read from another document. This was documented in their files following routine check-ins, not in response to any specific incident. That hit me harder than I'd expected. Hearing that my kids had noticed, had been worried about me, had been carrying the weight of our dysfunction to school, that hurt worse than any slap Sloan could have delivered. Because the whole time I'd been telling myself I was protecting them by not fighting back, by not making waves, by just taking whatever Sloan dished out with a smile and a yes, dear. They'd been watching their father get slowly ground down into nothing. Sloan tried to interrupt, tried to spin it, tried to do that thing she always did where she made herself the victim of other people's misunderstandings and oversensitivity. But Ariella just held up one hand, a gesture I'd seen her use in depositions to shut down opposing counsel, and kept reading. The pattern shows escalation over time, culminating in today's physical assault in front of multiple witnesses, including both minor children. She said, "This is not about punishment, Miss Mercer. This is about establishing boundaries that should have been in place months ago." I watched Sloan's mind racing, probably trying to figure out some angle, some way to regain control of the narrative. She was used to being the smartest person in the room, the one with all the information, the one calling the shots. Finding out that her quiet, unassuming husband had been building a legal case against her while she wasn't looking. That had to be like discovering your goldfish had been planning a jailbreak. "You planned this?" Sloan accused, pointing at me through the sliding glass door like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. "You set me up." "No," Ariella corrected, her voice as calm as a meditation app. "You set yourself up. Mr. Jordan simply documented your choices. Every single incident in these files represents a decision you made about how to treat your family. We didn't create this evidence. We just organized it." The VP twins were now actively backing toward the gate, making those important phone call gestures that people make when they want to escape a situation without looking like they're fleeing a sinking ship. Smart move. Honestly, when your boss is getting served with legal papers at a family barbecue, it's probably time to update your LinkedIn profile and start networking. The lesson here, Ariella said, closing the folders with the finality of a judge's gavel, isn't destruction, it's boundaries. Real enforceable boundaries that protect everyone involved, including you, Ms. Mercer. She gathered her papers, nodded to the security team, and headed toward the gate. But before she left, she turned back to Sloan one more time. "The review process begins Monday morning. I'd suggest you use this weekend to reflect on how you got here because the board is going to want answers. And Ms. Mercer," she paused, looking directly at my wife with something that might have been pity. "Next time someone asks you to put your phone away for 5 minutes, you might want to consider just putting the phone away." As they walked away, leaving Sloan standing alone on our deck, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be her unquestioned authority, I finally stepped outside. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as the convenient house husband she could push around whenever she felt like flexing, but as someone who just reminded her that actions have consequences. "Why?" she asked, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely confused instead of just angry. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, standing there in her expensive suit, surrounded by the ruins of her own making, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Because I said simply, love without boundaries isn't love. It's just slow motion suicide. And with that, I walked back inside to check on our kids, leaving Sloan alone with the mess she'd made and the painful lesson she was just beginning to understand. Here's the thing about being a parent during a crisis. You can't just fall apart and sort yourself out later like you're some childless 20-some having an existential breakdown in a studio apartment. When you've got two little humans watching your every move, trying to figure out if their world is still safe or if everything they thought they knew about family just got flushed down the toilet. You better get your act together fast. So, while Sloan was outside having what I can only describe as a very expensive, nervous breakdown, I did what any decent father would do. I went into damage control mode for the only people in this whole mess who actually mattered. "Hey guys," I called the Micah and Rowan who were standing by the sliding door looking like they'd just witnessed their parents' marriage get hit by a meteor, which let's be honest, they basically had. "How about we head inside for some juice and a chat?" Micah being 10 and therefore old enough to recognize when adults are using their everything's fine voices while everything is clearly not fine gave me that look kids give you when they know you're about to feed them a line of BS but they're willing to play along because they love you. Rowan, bless his 7-year-old heart, was still stuck in processing mode. His little brain trying to make sense of why mommy had hit daddy and why strangers with official papers had shown up like they were delivering the world's worst pizza. We settled around our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten probably 1,000 meals together, where the kids had done homework and built Lego castles and had those rambling conversations that kids have about whether dinosaurs would like ice cream. Now, it was going to be the setting for the most important conversation I'd ever had with my children, and I was absolutely terrified of screwing it up. So, I said, pouring apple juice into their favorite cups. Micah's had dinosaurs on it. Rowan was covered in stars. That was pretty intense out there, huh? Understatement of the century, but you've got to start somewhere. Micah, who'd inherited his mother's direct communication style, but thankfully not her cruel streak, cut right to the chase. Why did mom hit you, Dad? Jesus. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that his mother has turned into someone you barely recognize? That the woman who used to read him bedtime stories and kiss his scraped knees had somehow transformed into a corporate robot who thought violence was an acceptable response to minor inconvenience. Sometimes, I said, choosing my words like I was defusing a bomb. Grown-ups make really bad choices when they're feeling angry or stressed. What mom did was wrong. Hitting is never okay, even when you're upset about something. Rowan piped up, his voice small and confused. But you always tell us that hitting means time out. Out of the mouths of babes, right? My 7-year-old had just summed up the entire situation with the kind of crystal clarity that most adults spend years in therapy trying to achieve. If hitting means time out for kids, then hitting definitely means time out for grown-ups, especially grown-ups who should know better. You're absolutely right, buddy. I told him. And that's exactly what's happening. Mom is going to have a grown-up timeout so she can think about her choices and learn how to make better ones. Micah, who'd been stirring his juice with the intensity of a mad scientist, looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that were way too wise for a 10-year-old. Is that why those people came with papers? Like when the principal calls parents to the office? Smart kid, too smart for his own good, honestly. Something like that. I said, when grown-ups break important rules, especially rules about being kind to their family, other grown-ups have to step in and help fix things. I could see both kids processing this information, trying to fit it into their understanding of how the world was supposed to work. For them, family had always been this safe, stable thing. Even when Sloane was working crazy hours or being cranky, she was still mom. Still the person who was supposed to love and protect them unconditionally. The idea that mom could be the source of danger instead of safety was probably like discovering that gravity worked backwards on Tuesdays. My phone buzzed with a text from Miss Santos, the school counselor I'd reached out to earlier in the week when I'd started realizing this day was inevitable. Thank God for people like her, the unsung heroes who deal with the fallout when families implode and kids get caught in the crossfire. Quick check-in scheduled for Monday, her text read. Art therapy session Tuesday. I've already briefed their teachers about the situation. We've got them covered. I showed the kids the text because transparency was going to be the new family policy around here. Miss Santos wants to meet with you guys next week just to check in and make sure you're doing okay with all these changes. Are we in trouble? Rowan asked, and the worry in his voice nearly broke my heart. No, sweetie, I said, reaching over to ruffle his hair. You guys aren't in trouble at all. Miss Santos just wants to make sure you have someone to talk to about your feelings because this is probably pretty confusing and maybe a little scary. Micah nodded thoughtfully. Like when Tommy's parents got divorced and he got to see the special counselor who had all the cool art supplies. Exactly like that. I confirm sometimes when families go through big changes. Kids need extra support to help them understand what's happening and how they're feeling about it. What I didn't tell them. What I couldn't tell them because they were too young to understand the full scope of what their mother had become was that I'd been planning this conversation for weeks. I'd researched child psychologists, read books about helping kids cope with family trauma, even practice different ways to explain divorce and separation in age-appropriate language. Because unlike their mother, I'd seen this train wreck coming from miles away and had actually bothered to prepare for the impact. The sliding door opened and Zeke walked in like he owned the place, carrying a stack of takeout containers loaded with leftover food. My best friend since college, the guy who'd been my best man and was now apparently my cleanup crew. He didn't say anything about the legal circus that had just concluded on our deck. Just started loading containers into the fridge like this was a perfectly normal Saturday afternoon. Uncle Zeke. Rowan launched himself at Zeke's legs, which was probably the first normal kid reaction I'd seen since this whole nightmare began. Hey there, Space Cadet, Zeke said, scooping Rowan up like he weighed nothing. Heard you guys are having some big changes around here. I caught Zeke's eye over Rowan's head and mouth. Thank you. He just shrugged like it was no big deal. Like showing up to help clean up the wreckage of your best friend's marriage was just standard weekend activities. Are you going to help Dad take care of us? Micah asked, and there was something in his voice. Not quite fear, but definitely uncertainty about what their new normal was going to look like. I'm going to help however your dad needs me to, Zeke said simply. But your dad's been taking pretty good care of you guys all by himself for a while now, hasn't he? Both kids nodded, and I felt this weird surge of pride mixed with sadness. They had noticed. They'd been aware that I was the one showing up, the one being present, the one making sure homework got done and lunches got packed and bedtime stories got read. They'd known, even if they couldn't articulate it, that their family had been running on one parent for months. Through the window, I could see the security contractors maintaining their professional distance near the gate while Sloane sat at our patio table, staring at the stack of papers like they might spontaneously combust if she glared hard enough. The VP twins had vanished, probably already on conference calls with their own lawyers, trying to figure out how much of this corporate drama was going to splash back on them. So, what happens now? Micah asked, cutting through my distracted observation with the kind of direct question that reminded me why kids make the best journalists. Now, I said, sitting back down and looking at both of my boys, these two amazing little humans who deserve so much better than having a front row seat to their parents' relationship detonating like a faulty firework. We figure out our new normal. We make some new rules about how we want our family to work. We talk to Miss Santos and Dr. Wolf about our feelings. And we remember that no matter what happens between Mom and me, we both love you guys more than anything in the universe. Even when Mom gets mad? Rowan asked. Even when Mom gets mad? I confirmed. Adults can make bad choices and still love their kids. Sometimes loving someone means helping them learn how to make better choices. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Miss Santos. Emergency counseling session available tonight. If needed. I can be there in 30 minutes. I looked at my kids, really looked at them, trying to gauge how they were handling this emotional earthquake. Micah seemed thoughtful, but not devastated. Rowan was already getting distracted by the leftover bubbles on the deck. Resilient little dudes, both of them, stronger than I'd given them credit for. I think we're okay for tonight, I texted back. But, thank you for being ready. Through the window, I watched one of the security contractors approach Sloane with what looked like professional courtesy mixed with gentle firmness. Time for her to leave, apparently. Time for our house to stop being a corporate battleground and start being a home again. Daddy, Rowan said, tugging on my sleeve. Can we have pancakes for dinner? And you know what? That sounded like the perfect way to start our new life. Pancakes for dinner? Because sometimes when your world gets turned upside down, you need to eat dessert first just to remember that you're still allowed to make choices that bring joy instead of stress. Absolutely. I said pancakes, it is because that's what good fathers do. They make pancakes when the world falls apart. They answer hard questions with honest words. And they remember that protecting your kids sometimes means standing up to the person who's supposed to be helping you protect them. The lesson was just beginning, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally learning the right things. You know what's beautiful about corporate karma? It doesn't need a fancy conference room or a mahogany table to serve up a steaming hot plate of consequences. Sometimes it happens right there in your driveway while you're wearing a wrinkled white suit and contemplating the smoking ruins of your professional reputation. Riley Park, Sloane's supposedly loyal CFO and the woman who'd spent the last 3 years kissing my wife's ass like it was her full-time job, chose that exact moment to call. And here's where it gets really good. Ariella hadn't left yet. She was standing right there, probably savoring this moment like a fine wine when Sloane's phone started playing that obnoxious classical music ringtone she used for important business calls. Riley, Sloane answered. And I could hear the desperation in her voice, even through the sliding glass door. Riley, thank God. Please tell me you can fix this nightmare. But here's the thing about corporate loyalty. It's a lot like a fair-weather friendship. It looks real solid when everything's going great. But the second storm clouds roll in, suddenly everyone remembers they have other places to be. I watched Sloane's face cycle through about 15 different emotions as Riley delivered what was obviously bad news. Wrapped in corporate speak. The kind of conversation where phrases like brand risk assessment and stakeholder concerns really mean you're screwed and we're all pretending it's about business instead of you being a terrible human being. The branding committee flagged this as a potential liability. I could hear Riley saying, her voice tiny through the phone speaker. She sounded wounded but determined, like someone who just discovered her boss was a liability instead of an asset. The insurers are requiring a full review before they'll continue coverage. And Jordan, Argent Bio, specifically requested a meeting about leadership tone and company values. Argent Bio, Sloan's biggest client, the company that basically funded half of Mercer Dynamics' quarterly profits. The same executives who'd been at that charity dinner where Sloan had publicly humiliated me, calling me her little house husband, like I was some kind of trophy wife who'd forgotten his place. They can't do this, Sloan was saying. But her voice had lost that commanding edge she usually wielded like a weapon. It's a private family matter. It has nothing to do with the company. Wrong again, sweetheart. When you make a career out of preaching, personal accountability, and leadership integrity while treating your own family like garbage, people tend to notice the hypocrisy. Ariella stepped closer to the phone conversation with the kind of professional courtesy that probably terrified opposing counsel in depositions. Miss Mercer, may I remind you that the assault occurred in front of company employees? Your VPs Jessica Martinez and Mark Thompson were present and witnessed the entire incident. All right. The corporate cheerleaders who'd been so eager to bask in Sloan's reflected glory were now probably updating their resumes and practicing there. I was just following orders speeches for HR interviews. Riley's voice came through the speaker again, and this time she sounded less like a loyal lieutenant and more like someone reading an obituary. The board voted unanimously, Sloan. Unanimous. Do you understand what that means? It means you burned every bridge, alienated every ally, and turned your own board of directors into a firing squad. But please don't let me interrupt this educational moment. This is temporary, Sloan kept repeating, like saying it enough times would make it true. This is just a misunderstanding. Once I explain what? Riley interrupted. And wow, I'd never heard her use that tone with Sloan before. Explain why you physically assaulted your husband at a family gathering. Explain why our biggest client is questioning whether we share their values. Explain why our insurance company is treating this like a liability review. The VP brigade, who'd been hovering near the gate like vultures waiting for roadkill, suddenly decided they had urgent business elsewhere. Jessica was already speed dialing what was probably her personal lawyer, while Mark had that deer in headlights look of someone who'd just realized he'd been standing too close to a sinking ship. This is business, Riley continued, her voice getting stronger with every word. This isn't personal. It's not vindictive. It's just business. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company from leadership that creates liability. Leadership that creates liability. I love that phrase. It was corporate speak for your wife is a walking lawsuit waiting to happen. Janet and Carlos, the security contractors who'd been maintaining their professional distance, moved with the kind of subtle efficiency that suggested this conversation was about to reach its natural conclusion. Not threatening, not aggressive, just present, ready to help anyone who needed assistance finding their way to the exit. You need to leave now, Ariella said, her voice still maintaining that perfect balance of professional courtesy and absolute finality. The protection order is in effect, and continuing to remain on the property would constitute violation of a court order. Sloan looked around our backyard like she was seeing it for the first time. The deck where our kids had taken their first steps. The garden where we'd planted tomatoes every spring. The fire pit where we'd roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories back when we were still a family instead of a corporate case study in domestic dysfunction. This is my house, she said, but her voice was hollow now. The fight was going out of her like air from a punctured tire. Actually, Ariella corrected gently. According to the emergency order, this is a protected residence. You're welcome to collect personal items with supervision, but only after filing the appropriate request with the court. The appropriate request. God, I loved how everything was suddenly subject to proper procedures and official channels. The same woman who'd spent years bulldozing through other people's boundaries was now discovering what it felt like to have boundaries enforced on her. Riley's voice came through the phone one more time. Sloan, I need you to understand something. This isn't about destroying you or the company. This is about protecting both. The board still believes in your potential as a leader, but leadership means taking responsibility for your actions. All of your actions. And with that, she hung up. Riley Park, who'd been Sloan's usewoman for 3 years, had just delivered the professional equivalent of, maybe you should take some time to think about what you've done. The silence that followed was beautiful in its completeness. No more phones buzzing. No more corporate doublespeak. No more pretending that what had just happened was anything other than a powerful woman discovering that power without accountability is just another word for tyranny. Janet approached Sloan with the kind of professional compassion that suggested she'd done this before, helped other powerful people understand that their power had limits, their actions had consequences, and their time was up. M. Mercer, she said softly, we'd like to escort you to your vehicle now. There's no rush, no pressure, just a gentle transition off the property in compliance with the court order. Sloan looked back at our house one more time. At the kitchen window where I was visible with our kids, at the deck where she'd just blown up her entire life, at the garden where we'd once been happy. And for just a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married instead of the corporate monster she'd become. Then she straightened her shoulders, fixed her hair, and walked toward the gate like she was heading to just another business meeting. The lesson was in progress, and class was officially in session. You know what's weird about reclaiming your space after someone toxic leaves? It's not dramatic like in the movies where you burn their clothes and change all the locks while some empowering anthem plays in the background. It's quiet, almost mundane, like rearranging furniture to let light into corners that have been dark for way too long. That night, after the legal circus had packed up and left town, after the kids had processed their feelings over pancakes and bedtime stories, after the last of our shell-shocked guests had awkwardly shuffled home with leftover ribs and traumatic memories, I found myself standing in our living room at 11 p.m. staring at furniture like it had personally offended me. The couch was positioned so that whoever sat in Sloane's usual spot could see both the TV and the kitchen, maintaining perfect sight lines for her favorite hobby of multitasking during family time. The coffee table was angled just right for her to prop her laptop while she participated in movie nights by answering emails. Even the kids' toy corner had been gradually pushed into the least convenient spot because their Lego castles cluttered the aesthetic of her perfect suburban showcase. Screw that. Screw all of that. I started moving furniture like I was performing an exorcism. The couch got rotated 90 degrees facing the windows instead of the kitchen, creating this cozy little family circle instead of Sloane's command and control viewing station. The coffee table got pushed back, opening up floor space for the kids to actually play instead of having to tiptoe around Mom's mobile office setup. Micah wandered downstairs in his dinosaur pajamas, probably drawn by the sound of furniture scraping across hardwood floors. "What are you doing, Dad?" "Making some changes," I said, wrestling with the armchair that Sloane had claimed as her throne. "What do you think?" "Better." He looked around with that serious consideration kids bring to important questions, like where to put furniture ranked right up there with whether aliens exist and why vegetables are mandatory. Then he disappeared upstairs and came back carrying his favorite dragon toy. This ridiculous stuffed thing with purple wings and a lopsided grin that he'd had since he was 3. Without a word, he marched over to the bookshelf and placed the dragon on the middle shelf right at eye level like he was planting a flag on conquered territory. "There," he announced with satisfaction. "Now it looks like our house." Our house. Not Mom's showcase. Not the Mercer Family Museum. Just our house where kids could put dragon toys on bookshelves and nobody would call it clutter. Rowan appeared next, clutching a piece of construction paper covered in crayon stars. He'd been working on it during dinner, tongue poking out in concentration while he colored. Now he was standing on the couch, carefully taping his masterpiece to the wall above where we'd repositioned everything. "Safe spot," he whispered, smoothing down the tape. "Now it's a safe spot." Jesus 7 years old and he already understood what I'd been trying to figure out for months. That home is supposed to be where you feel safe, not where you walk on eggshells waiting for the next explosion. I pulled out my phone and started making lists because apparently I'd inherited Sloane's organizational obsession, but was planning to use it for good instead of evil. New family rules. I typed dinner together every night. Devices down during family time. 3 gratitudes before bed. Simple stuff. Basic human decency disguised as house rules. Revolutionary concepts like actually paying attention to your kids and treating family time like it mattered. Dr. Ellen Wolf, family therapist extraordinaire, got an email from me at 11:47 p.m. requesting sessions for all 3 of us. I'd researched her for weeks. She specialized in helping families rebuild after trauma, had great reviews from other divorced dads, and most importantly, she didn't take insurance from Sloane's company. The last thing I needed was my wife somehow getting access to our therapy notes through corporate healthcare benefits. Before I went to bed, I wrote myself a note and stuck it on the bathroom mirror where I'd see it every morning. No rage, only structure. Because the temptation to let anger drive this whole process was real. It would have been so easy to turn this into a revenge fantasy, to enjoy watching Sloane suffer, to let bitterness poison whatever came next. But that wasn't the lesson I wanted to teach my kids. The lesson wasn't that powerful people deserve to be destroyed when they fall. It was that everyone, even powerful people, especially powerful people, needed boundaries. Consequences weren't about punishment. They were about teaching someone that their actions affect other people and those other people matter. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I looked back at our rearranged living room. It looked different, brighter, somehow more open, more like a place where a family actually lived instead of where they performed for each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more lawyers, more difficult conversations. But tonight, in a house where dragon toys claimed shelf space and crayon stars marked safe spots, We'd taken the first step towards something that felt suspiciously like peace. The revolution was just getting started. There's something deeply surreal about sitting in a courtroom watching your marriage get dissected like a high school biology class frog. Except instead of finding organs and stuff, everyone's poking around looking for evidence of emotional abuse and finding plenty of it. Meticulously documented and legally admissible, Judge Patricia Navarro looked like someone who'd seen every flavor of human dysfunction and had stopped being surprised by any of it around her third year on the bench. She had that particular brand of patient authority that said, "I've heard all the excuses, seen all the sob stories, and I'm here to cut through and figure out what's actually best for the kids involved." Ariella had warned me that family court was basically theater where everyone pretends to be reasonable while fighting over the most unreasonable situation imaginable. She wasn't wrong. Sloane's attorney, some expensive suit named Bradley, who looked like he'd rather be negotiating corporate mergers than explaining why his client thought domestic violence was an acceptable conflict resolution strategy, kept trying to paint me as some kind of calculating mastermind who'd orchestrated this whole thing. "Your Honor," Bradley said in that pompous voice that lawyers probably practice in law school, "my client contends that Mr. Jordan has been systematically planning this alleged incident for months, deliberately provoking." "Objection," Ariella interrupted smoothly. "Is counsel seriously suggesting that asking one's spouse to put down their phone at a family gathering constitutes provocation worthy of physical assault?" Judge Navarro didn't even look up from the video statements she was reviewing. Sustained. "Mr. Bradley, unless you're planning to argue that common courtesy is grounds for battery, I suggest you find a different angle." The video statements were Ariella's masterstroke. Instead of dragging our neighbors into court to testify about our family drama, she'd had them record their accounts from the comfort of their own homes. Mrs. Lau, sitting in her perfectly organized kitchen, calmly describing the various times she'd heard Sloane screaming at me like I was a disobedient employee. Mr. Broke for walking his dog while explaining how he'd witnessed the car key incident and had seriously considered calling the police. But the real kicker was the footage from our own security camera. There's something particularly damning about watching yourself on video, especially when that video shows you behaving like a complete psychopath while your husband tries to maintain his dignity and your kids watch their mother lose her damn mind. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple. No dramatic speeches, no emotional manipulation, just the truth delivered as plainly as possible. "Your Honor, I want peace for our kids. I want them to feel safe in their own home. I want them to see what healthy relationships look like instead of watching their parents tear each other apart." Sloane's lawyer tried to argue that the corporate consequences were excessive, that mixing family court with employment issues was somehow unfair. But here's the beautiful thing about consequences. They don't care about your feelings or your sense of fairness. They care about cause and effect, action and reaction, the basic laws of social physics that even CEOs can't negotiate their way around. Judge Navarro granted most of our requested parenting plan, structured visits for Sloane, completion of anger management courses, family therapy for everyone involved. Not because I'd asked for revenge, but because protecting kids from witnessing domestic violence was apparently considered a reasonable judicial priority. As we walked out of the courthouse, Sloane looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in that way, people shrink when they realize their usual tricks aren't working anymore. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. No victory dance, no celebration, no gloating, just this long, deep breath that filled my lungs with something that felt suspiciously like hope. Here's something nobody warns you about when your spouse's public meltdown becomes the talk of the town. The rumors move faster than wildfire through a dry forest. Except instead of destroying everything, they somehow make your life better. Go figure. Within 48 hours, every corporate executive within a 50-mile radius knew some version of what had happened at our barbecue. But here's the weird part. Instead of the story being crazy house husband destroys successful CEO wife, it became accountability finally catches up with executive who forgot basic human decency. Apparently, Sloane had made enemies I didn't even know about. The official version floating around the business community was sanitized corporate speak, leadership transition due to conduct review, temporary operational restructuring, family focus, and professional development. Translation: your CEO lost her damn mind at a backyard barbecue and got served with legal papers in front of witnesses. But instead of investors running for the hills like I'd expected, something miraculous happened. They started writing letters, not angry. What the hell is happening with our investment letters? But supportive accountability is actually attractive in leadership letters. Turns out a lot of people have been waiting for someone to finally call Sloane on her. We appreciate companies that maintain high standards for executive behavior. One major investor wrote to the board, leadership integrity at home reflects leadership capacity in business. Another one was even more direct about damn time someone held her accountable. Meanwhile, I went back to my regular life at North Harbor Studio like nothing had happened. Because honestly, what was I supposed to do? Take out a billboard advertising my newfound status as guy who successfully divorced a CEO? The work still needed to get done. The kids still needed school lunches packed and life still required showing up even when everything felt surreal. Zeke had basically moved into our guest room without asking permission. Showing up every morning with 2 coffees and the kind of steady presence that said, "Your life just exploded, but I'm not going anywhere." He didn't ask probing questions or offer unsolicited advice. Just sat on our porch, drank coffee, and existed as proof that some people actually know how to be decent human beings without it requiring a court order. "You doing okay?" He'd ask every morning like clockwork. "Yeah," I'd answer. And the crazy part was, I actually meant it. Sloane could rebuild if she wanted to do the work. The board had made that clear. This wasn't permanent destruction, just enforced reflection. She could take her classes, learn to manage her anger, figure out how to be a leader without being a tyrant. Whether she would actually do any of that remained to be seen, but at least now she had the opportunity to become someone worth respecting again. As for me, I kept things simple. School drop-offs where I actually talked to other parents instead of hiding behind Sloane's intimidating reputation. Spaghetti nights where we ate at the table and discussed our days like normal families do. Soccer practice where I cheered for Rowan without checking my phone every 30 seconds to see if Sloane needed something. Normal life. Revolutionary concept apparently. 3 weeks later, Sloane showed up at our front gate like a normal person asking permission instead of a corporate raider demanding tribute. The difference was jarring. She actually knocked and waited instead of barging in like she owned the place. Which technically she still half did, but apparently legal papers have a way of teaching people about basic courtesy. Could I see the boys' Firefly jar?" she asked, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. "I know it's not my scheduled time, but Rowan mentioned it during our last visit." Progress. Actual measurable progress. 6 months ago, Sloane would have pushed past me and taken whatever she wanted while lecturing me about being unnecessarily difficult. Now, she was asking permission and referencing something our 7-year-old had told her during supervised visitation. I nodded and let her in, keeping it structured like the court order required, but not making it feel like a prison visit. We walked to the kitchen where the kids had set up their latest project, a mason jar full of fireflies they had caught the night before, complete with air holes and a tiny dish of sugar water because Rowan was convinced fireflies got thirsty. She seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, she was still wearing those expensive suits and designer heels, but her presence didn't fill up the entire room anymore. She'd taken that first parenting class, completed the anger management prerequisite, and apparently learned that listening was a skill worth developing. Maybe it would last, maybe it wouldn't. People don't usually change overnight, especially people who've spent years believing their own press releases about being untouchable. But for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw flashes of the woman I'd married instead of the corporate monster she'd become. The painful lesson wasn't my revenge. It never had been. It was Sloane's discovery that titles don't make you the man in charge. Character does. Leadership at work means absolutely nothing if you can't lead yourself at home. If you can't treat the people who love you with basic human decency. As for me, I learned that love without boundaries isn't love. It's just slow-motion suicide dressed up as devotion. With both kids finally asleep, I wrote one final line in the notebook I'd started keeping. Power is quiet. A door that locks, a routine that holds, a father who stays. And for the first time since that slap heard round the backyard, I felt like our house belonged to all of us again.